I had been riding the wrong direction for 3 years before I came to Redthorn Valley, and I couldn't have told you which direction was wrong or which was right. I put Harlow County behind me, the way a man puts down a thing that has burned him fast, without looking at his hand, and I drifted south and west through country that didn't ask questions, which was the only kind of country I could stand anymore. I was riding a blue roan mare named Etch, and Etch was limping by the time we dropped off the mesa rim and followed the dry creek bed into the valley. The creek had given up on water sometime in the last decade, or so the white alkali crust along its banks suggested, but the grass on either side of it was taller than I expected, still green in places, still worth something. And when I topped a low rise and saw the ranch below, I felt the particular kind of relief a man feels when he has been traveling on fumes and finally smells something solid. The spread was modest. A main house built of adobe brick with a wood frame addition tacked on the east side, a barn that needed its roof seen to, a set of corrals that were in better shape than anything else on the place. There was a kitchen garden along the south wall of the house, and even from a quarter-mile out I could see it had been tended recently. The rows were straight, the ground between them turned. Someone cared about this place. Someone worked it. I rode down slow. I always rode down slow to unfamiliar places. In my former life that was policy. In my present life it was just habit wearing the same clothes. The woman came out of the barn before I reached the gate. She was carrying a pitchfork loosely in one hand, not pointing it at me, not setting it aside, just holding it in that middle position that says I haven't decided yet. She was somewhere around 40, lean the way people who work hard go lean, dark hair pulled back under a hat that had seen more weather than most hats survive. Her face was the kind of face that has made a lot of decisions and stuck by most of them. "Help you," she said. It wasn't a question. "Water if you have it," I said. "For the horse first, for me if there's any left." She looked at Etch for a moment. Etch was favoring her left foreleg and it showed. "Stone bruise," the woman said. "Picked it up coming off the mesa, loose shale." She stepped back from the gate without saying more, which I took as permission. I dismounted and led Etch through, and the woman walked alongside us to the water trough near the barn. The trough was fed by a pipe from somewhere uphill, a holding tank on higher ground, I guessed, gravity-fed. The water that came from it was clear and cold, and Etch put her nose in and didn't lift it for a long while. "Nora Fenn," the woman said. "Cass Aldermore." She didn't ask what I'd done before or where I'd come from or where I was headed, and I didn't offer. That kind of conversation suited me fine. She let me put Etch in an empty stall and pack the bruised hoof with mud poultice the way I knew how, and when I came out, she was at the house door. "I can offer you supper," she said. "It won't be much. It'll be more than I had this morning." It was beans and salt pork and cornbread made in a skillet. She set it on the table and sat across from me and ate her own portion, and we didn't talk much while we ate. The house was clean and spare. There was a man's coat still hanging on a peg near the door, but the dust on its shoulders told me no man had worn it in some time. A photograph on the shelf above the fireplace. A man and this woman younger, the man squinting against sun. I didn't look at it too long. "You can sleep in the barn if you want to rest Etch before moving on," she said, when the plates were empty. "I'll take that, thank you. I'll need the stall back in 2 days. I've got stock coming in from the rafter P. 2 days is more than I need." I was washing my plate at the basin when I noticed the window above the basin looked out toward the west pasture, and in the west pasture the fence line ran about 200 yards before it ended in a series of blackened posts, burned off at ground level, the wire sagging between them. 3 sections of fence, maybe 4, destroyed deliberately. I'd seen accidental fire, and I'd seen deliberate fire, and I knew the difference in how the burn sat on the wood. I didn't say anything about it that night. I said goodnight and went to the barn and lay down in the straw with my coat over me, and I listened to the valley the way I had listened to 1,000 nights in 1,000 different places. The wind off the mesa came down steady and dry. Coyotes somewhere to the north, Etch breathing in her stall. I thought about the burned fence posts for a while before I went asleep. They came at dusk the next evening. I was out at Etch's stall checking the hoof when I heard horses, 3 of them, coming in from the south road at a trot. Not rushing, not sneaking. The kind of arrival that wants to be seen. I stayed where I was and looked through the gap in the barn boards. 3 riders. The one in front was built like a man who had won most of his arguments with other men's faces, broad across the shoulders, wearing a black vest over a gray shirt, a hat pushed back on his head. He rode with his hands loose on the saddle horn, which is the posture of a man who isn't worried about anything. The 2 behind him were younger and meaner looking in the way young men get when someone with authority has told them they don't need to be careful. Nora came out of the house. She stood on the porch with her arms at her sides. "Evening, Widow Fenn," the front rider said. He reined up short of the gate but didn't dismount. "Warm night. What do you want, Dex?" "Just riding through." He looked at the barn, and I had the feeling he could see me through the boards even though I knew he couldn't. Still thinking on Mr. Gretsch's offer. I told Mr. Gretsch what I thought of his offer. He said you seemed uncertain. The rider Dex shifted in the saddle. Those fence posts, terrible thing, dry lightning probably, easy for a fire to get away from a person. There was no lightning that night. No, I don't suppose there was. He smiled with his mouth only. Mr. Gretsch is patient, Mrs. Fenn, but he's got investors who are not so patient, tends to create a pressure. You understand pressure. "You should go now," Nora said. "We're just passing through." He turned his horse slow, the way a man does when he wants to demonstrate that he's turning on his own schedule and not because he was told to. "Think on it. This valley's going to change whether you want it to or not. Easier to take a good price than to be left with nothing." The 3 of them rode back out the gate and south along the road. Nora watched them until they were out of sight, then stood on the porch for another moment with her back to me, very still. I came out of the barn. "How long?" I said. She turned. She'd known I was there the whole time, I think. She had that quality of knowing where things were without making a point of looking. 6 weeks, she said. Since Gretsch sent the first offer, the fence was 3 weeks ago. A calf turned up dead in the south draw last week, poisoned water the look of it. That's Dex Vance. He works for Gretsch. And Gretsch is in Pelford. He has an office there. He calls himself a land agent, but what he is a man with money behind him and no scruple about how he uses it. He's been buying up valley land for 2 years. Some people sold. Some people, she stopped. Some people found it easier to sell after things started going wrong with their stock. "Your husband," I said, and I meant it as a question about the coat on the peg, the photograph. "Fever 18 months ago." She said it the way people say things they have said many times, worn smooth. "He built this place. I'm not leaving it." I looked out at the burned fence line in the failing light. "I'll fix those posts tomorrow," I said. "You don't owe me anything. You can move on in the morning." "I know I can," I said. "I'll fix the posts." I fixed the posts. It took most of the day digging out the burned stubs, setting new ones from timber in the barn that Nora's husband had laid by, stretching and stapling the wire. Nora worked alongside me without being asked, holding posts while I tamped them, handling the wire stretcher on the far end. She worked without complaint and without conversation beyond what the work required, and I found I didn't mind that. At midday she brought water, and we sat in the shade of the fence line for 10 minutes. She'd taken off her hat, and her hair had come partly loose from its pin, and she was looking out over the pasture at the cattle grazing there. 9 head, she said. I had 22 when Garrett died. I've been selling down to make the note payments. I've got 6 months left on the note before it's clear, and then the place is mine outright. Gretch knows about the note. Gretch knows everything about everyone in this valley. He's had 6 months to wait me out. She put her hat back on. The man who holds the note is Ira Paulsum at the Pelford Bank. He's honest enough, I think. He's not part of whatever Gretch is running, but if Gretch can make enough trouble that I miss a payment, she left it there. How much is the note payment? $40 a month. I can make it if nothing else goes wrong. She said the last 4 words in the tone of someone who has learned that things go wrong. Tell me about Gretch's investors, I said. I don't know much. There's been talk in Pelford about a railroad spur. If the spur goes through this valley, the land value triples overnight. Gretch has been positioning himself for 2 years to own as much of it as possible before anyone knows for certain the spur is coming. I thought about that. I thought about Dex Vance and the 2 riders behind him, and the way Vance had looked at the barn. He'll come back, I said. I know. And next time, he may not leave when you tell him to. She looked at me then, steady, direct, the way she looked at everything. I know that too, she said. We went back to the fence. That evening, I told Nora I was going to ride into Pelford. She didn't ask why, and I didn't volunteer a full explanation. I said I wanted to get a sense of the town, which was true as far as it went. Pelford was 8 miles south, strung along a single main street with a bank, a general store, a saloon called the Territorial, a land office with a freshly painted sign that read Gretch and Associates, Land Acquisitions, and a scattering of smaller establishments. It was bigger than a town that size had any right to be in territory this dry, which told me the railroad rumors were real enough that people had already started betting on them. I tied Etch at the rail in front of the Territorial and went in. I wasn't there to drink, or not primarily. I was there because a saloon is where a town talks to itself, and I wanted to hear what Pelford was saying. What it was saying was that Reuel Gretch had offers on 11 valley properties, that 4 of them had already sold, that 3 more were in what one man described as negotiations. And when he said it, the man across the table from him laughed in a way that didn't have any humor in it. I heard Dex Vance's name twice. Both times the speaker lowered his voice. I had a cup of coffee at the bar. The bartender raised an eyebrow at the coffee order but produced it, and I sat and listened and watched the room until I had what I'd come for. Then I went across the street to the land office and tried the door. It was after business hours and the door was locked, but the side window had a gap at the bottom of its shade, and I stood at a certain angle in the last of the daylight and read what I could read of the papers spread on the desk inside. There was a map. I could see enough of it to see that the valley was carved into parcels, and that most of the parcels had initials written in them, RG, and that the ones that didn't yet had question marks. Nora Fenn's parcel, as best I could judge from the map's orientation, had a question mark. I went back to Etch and rode back to the ranch. Nora was on the porch when I returned. She'd lit a lamp and set it on the rail and was sitting in a chair she'd dragged out, and she had a rifle across her knees. She didn't move when I rode up. Anything, she said. It's real, I said. The railroad. Gretch has most of the valley already. He needs yours. I knew that. I wanted to see for myself. I dismounted and tied Etch to the porch rail and sat down on the steps. The night was quiet in the way the desert gets at full dark, not empty, just very still. Tell me who you were, Nora said. I looked at her. Before, she said, the way you looked at those riders, the way you went to Pelford and came back knowing what you needed to know, you weren't just a drifter passing through. There was no accusation in it, and there was no softness either. It was just a question from a woman who wanted to know what she was dealing with. Marshal, I said, Harlow County. 12 years. What happened? It wasn't the kind of question you lie to, when it's asked that plainly. A man I was bringing in died in custody, I said. He was sick when I took him. I didn't know how sick. He died 2 days in. His family said I'd mistreated him. Some people believed them. I looked out at the dark valley. I don't know to this day if something I did or didn't do made the difference. That's the part I can't put down. She was quiet for a moment. So you left? I resigned first, I said. Then I left. She nodded once, as if that answer was sufficient. She didn't offer comfort and she didn't offer judgment, and I was grateful for both absences. Gretch isn't going to stop, I said. What happened with the fence and the calf, that's the start. He's got Vance doing his work for him, and Vance is going to get rougher. I know. So the question is what you want to do about it. She looked at me with that steady, considering look. I want to keep my land. Then we'll need to be smarter than they are, I said, and we may need to be harder. She stood up from the chair, tucked the rifle under her arm. I'm not a woman who needs protecting, she said. I can see that. But I'm also not stupid enough to turn away a man who knows what he's doing when Dex Vance is about to make his next move. No, I said. You're not stupid at all. She went inside and let the screen door close behind her, and I sat on the steps for a while longer and thought about Harlow County, and about the man who died in the jail cell, and about the particular quality of stillness that had settled over me in the last 3 years, neither peace nor despair, just a kind of waiting, like a door left open in an empty house. I hadn't expected to walk through a door again. I hadn't been looking for one. But here I was, sitting on Nora Fenn's porch steps in the dark, with burned fence posts in the west pasture and Dex Vance somewhere south of here, and something in me that had been very quiet for 3 years had stopped being quiet. I didn't know what to do with that yet, so I went to the barn and slept. 3 days passed. We worked. That's what I can tell you about those 3 days. We worked from before sunrise until after dark, and it turns out that working alongside someone is one of the faster ways to know them. I repaired the water line the Vance crew had cut. It ran from a holding tank on the hillside above the barn, and someone had loosened a joint coupling where the pipe crossed the dry creek bed. Easy enough to fix if you knew what you were looking for, easy enough to find again if you wanted to cause trouble. I put a new coupling on and braced the pipe with extra stakes and made a mental note of the spot. Nora rode the south draw every morning to check the water source there, and on the second morning she found 2 dead jackrabbits at the edge of the pool, a clear warning, meant to be understood. She came back to the ranch and told me about it without drama, and I went and looked, and confirmed it was what we both thought it was. He's testing, I said, seeing if you'll break and go. He's been testing for 6 weeks, she said. I haven't broken yet. He's going to stop testing soon. We were at the corral fence, and she was looking at her 9 cattle. They were thin. The stress of 6 weeks of intermittent harassment showed in them the way stress always shows in animals, in the coat, in the eyes, in the way they moved. I need those cattle in good shape, she said. I'm selling 5 head in 3 weeks to make the note payment, if they're off weight. We'll bring them up, I said. I know something about cattle. She looked at me. I ran cattle for 4 years before Harlow County, I said. Something crossed her face then, not quite a smile, but in the same family as one. Is there anything you haven't done? I haven't done this particularly well, I said, meaning the last 3 years, meaning the drifting and the empty days and the not knowing what direction was wrong. She seemed to understand what I meant. She looked away at the cattle. My husband was the one who knew cattle best, she said. He had a gift for it. I've learned a lot in 18 months, but there's plenty I'm still learning. What was his name? Garrett. She said it easily, like a word she'd said 10,000 times. He was a good man, not complicated. He knew what he wanted and he went and got it, and he wasn't ashamed of any of it. She paused. He wanted this valley. He wanted to build something here. He was 20 years older than me, and he knew he might not live to see it finished, and he did it anyway. The coat, I said, on the peg. I should probably take it down, she said. but I haven't been ready to. There's no rule about when you have to be ready. She looked at me again with that direct, considering look, and I felt it the way you feel things you haven't felt in a while, like a cold wind when you've been inside too long. I went to bring the cattle up to better pasture and didn't say anything more. On the fourth day, Vance came back. This time there were 5 of them. I was on the roof of the barn. I'd been patching a section of roofing where the boards had warped and the tar paper had given way, and I had a good view of the south road from up there. I saw them coming from a quarter-mile out, and I came down off the roof and went to the house. 5 riders, I said, Vance and 4. Nora set down what she was doing and reached for the rifle. Not yet, I said. Let's see what he wants. I know what he wants. He doesn't know that you have anyone here. Let me be a surprise. She looked at me for a moment, then set the rifle down on the table rather than carrying it out. That was her version of agreement. We went out to the porch together. The 5 riders came through the gate without stopping to ask if they could, which told me we had moved past the stage of polite menace. Vance pulled up in front of the porch. He looked at me with the flat, measuring look of a man recalibrating. Didn't see you the other night, he said. I was in the barn. Hired his help. Something like that, I said. He looked at Nora. Mr. Gretsch has authorized me to increase his offer. He's prepared to go to $900, Mrs. Fenn. That's generous for this place, given the condition of. No, Nora said. Vance tilted his head a fraction. Mrs. Fenn, you're a woman running this place alone. I mean that as an observation, not a criticism. But this valley is going to change, and the people who don't make accommodations now are going to find themselves. She said no, I said. Vance looked at me again. He was doing arithmetic, trying to decide what I was. His 4 riders had spread out a little, not a deliberate flanking, just the natural drift of men whose boss is having a tense conversation. You work for the widow, Vance said. I work for myself, I said, but I happen to be standing here. And who are you? Cass Aldermore. I was marshal of Harlow County for 12 years. I let that sit for a moment. I'm not marshal of anything now, but I still know every federal statute that applies to a situation where a land agent and his crew are burning fence posts and poisoning water sources to force a sale. Vance's face didn't change. He was good at that, at keeping his face still. But one of the riders behind him shifted in his saddle, and that shift told me something. Nobody's proved anything like that, Vance said. Not yet, I said. I spent some time in Pelford 3 days ago. The map on Gretsch's desk is interesting. So is the timing of incidents on properties that subsequently sold to him. I wasn't certain about all of this. I was working from what I'd seen through a window and what I'd heard in the saloon, but I said it with the authority of a man who is certain, which is a different thing and often just as effective. Vance looked at me for a long time, then he looked at Nora. Think carefully, he said. It was a last resort kind of statement. I have, Nora said. He turned his horse and the 4 riders turned with him, and they rode out the gate and back south. I watched them until the dust they raised had settled. That won't hold, I said. That was a delay, not a resolution. He'll come back, and next time he won't come to talk. I know, Nora said. So what do? We go to Pelford, I said, and we end it there before he decides to end it here. We rode to Pelford the next morning, the 2 of us. I went first to Ira Paulson at the bank. He was a spare, gray-haired man who wore his integrity the way some men wear a good coat, not ostentatiously, but consistently, in all weather. I told him who I was and what I'd been, and I told him what I believed Gretsch was doing in the valley, and I watched his face while I told him. Paulson already knew some of it. The unease on his face wasn't surprise. It was the particular unease of a man who has been suspecting something for a while, and has just been handed confirmation he wasn't sure he wanted. I hold 6 notes on Valley properties, he said. 4 of them sold to Gretch before I understood what was happening. By the time I saw the pattern, he shook his head. I'm a banker, Mr. Aldermore. My exposure is limited, but I am not a man who does business with coercion. What I need from you is simple, I said. Mrs. Fenn's note, I need you to assure her in writing that no circumstance Ruel Gretch can engineer will be used as a basis for calling it early. If she makes her payments, she keeps her land. Possum looked at Nora. Mrs. Fenn, he said, I should have made that assurance before now. I'm sorry I didn't. He stood up from his desk. I'll draw the letter up this morning. We left Possum's bank with the letter in Nora's coat pocket, and I felt something loosen in the day, not resolve, but direction. The land office was next. Ruel Gretch was a man who had constructed himself carefully. The suit was good. The office was appointed well, maps on the wall, a globe on a stand, the whole performance of a man of substance and judgment. He was perhaps 55, with soft hands and hard eyes, and he stood up from his desk when we came in and managed to look simultaneously welcoming and guarded. Mr. Aldermore, he said. He'd had time to hear about me. Pelford was a small town. Mrs. Fenn, please sit down. We'll stand, I said. He remained standing too, good instinct on his part. I'll be plain, I said. I have a general sense of what's been happening on Valley properties over the past 18 months. I have a specific sense of what's been happening on Mrs. Fenn's property over the past 6 weeks. I know Dex Vance's name and I know he works for you. I set my hat on the edge of his desk, which was a territorial gesture, and I meant it to be. What I'm going to do this morning is write down what I know in a letter and send it to the territorial marshal's office in Santa Fe. That letter is going either way. The only question is what else goes in it. Gretch was very still. You're not a marshal. No, but I know how territorial law works, and I know what a marshal's inquiry into a pattern of property harassment looks like. And I know that when investors hear that a territorial marshal is looking at a land acquisition scheme, they become very quiet very quickly. I looked at him steadily. Your investors are not going to like scrutiny. You have no proof of. I have a pattern, I said. A pattern is where proof starts. I paused. Here is what's going to happen. You are going to instruct Dex Vance and his crew to stay off Mrs. Fenn's property from this day forward. You are going to close your interest in her parcel, and you are going to leave this valley's remaining independent properties alone. I looked at the map on his wall, the one I'd seen through the window, now fully visible to me. You've already got enough of this valley to run your scheme. Take what you have and be satisfied. Gretch looked at Nora. It was the look of a man running final calculations. And if I don't, he said. Then the letter to Santa Fe goes out this afternoon with everything I have, and you spend the next year explaining your business practices to a territorial marshal while your investors look for someone else to hold their money. I picked up my hat. I spent 12 years reading men who were deciding whether to push or yield. I know what you are. You're a man who wants to make money, not a man who wants a fight. You don't want this fight. A long moment passed. Vance will be told to stand down, Gretch said finally. I want to hear it in writing, Nora said. It was the first thing she'd said since we entered the office, and she said it with such calm finality that Gretch looked at her with something almost resembling respect. That's not something I. Write it down, she said. Or Mr. Aldermore writes his letter this afternoon. Another moment passed. Then Gretch sat back down at his desk, pulled a piece of paper toward him, and began to write. We rode back to the valley in the late afternoon, the sun behind us throwing our shadows long on the road ahead. Nora had the letter from Gretch in her coat pocket alongside the letter from Possum, and she hadn't said much since we left Pelford. I didn't push it. There is a particular kind of quiet that people need after something that has been wound tight for a long time finally releases, and I knew enough to recognize it. We were a mile from the ranch when she said, "Do you think he'll hold to it?" Gretch, yes, I said. He's a businessman. He knows when the math has changed. Vance is a different question. She looked at me. Vance, I said, is a man who takes his direction from whoever is paying him, and Gretch just told him the game has changed. But Vance has a pride problem. Men like that don't always accept the new direction without making one more argument. You think he'll come to the ranch? I think he might, not on Gretch's orders, on his own, just to settle something in his head. I looked at the road ahead. If he does, it won't be to talk. She was quiet for a moment. Then we'd better be ready, she said. Yes, I said, we had better. Vance came 2 nights later. He came alone, which surprised me, and he came at the kind of hour when a man is hoping the people he's coming to see are asleep. I was not asleep. I had not expected to sleep, and so I had not tried. I was sitting in the barn doorway with my rifle across my knees and the lamp behind me turned down low, and I heard him come off the road about 10 minutes before I saw him. The sound of a horse walking slow and deliberate, the way a horse walks when its rider has reined it back to careful. He came in through the gate on foot, leading the horse, which meant he knew I might be watching, and he was trying to minimize the noise. That told me how serious he was. I stood up and stepped to the side of the barn doorway out of the light, and I said, "That's far enough, Vance." He stopped. He'd had his hand moving toward the pistol at his hip, and he stopped that too. The horse snorted once and was still. "Aldermore," he said. "Come into the yard where I can see you," I said. "Leave the horse there." He considered that. Then he dropped the reins and walked forward into the open ground between the barn and the house. The moon was high and 3/4 full, and I could see him well enough. His hands were at his sides. "Gretch sent me away," he said. "I heard. A year of work, more than a year, and then some drifter shows up," and he stopped, started again. "You were a marshal." "I was." "You don't have any authority here." "No," I said, "I don't. I have a rifle and a clear line of sight." A beat of silence. A nighthawk called somewhere in the dark. "She's going to sell eventually," he said. "Woman alone can't hold land out here, it's not." "She's held it for 18 months, I said. "And she'll hold it for 18 more. And after that it'll be paid off and clear, and there won't be anything left to hold against her." I kept the rifle steady. "Vance, I spent 12 years looking at men who were at crossroads. This is yours. You can ride out of here tonight and find some other work in some other county, or you can do whatever it is you came here to do and find out whether former marshals still shoot straight." I paused. "I do, for what it's worth." The silence stretched. I watched his hands. Then his shoulders dropped, not defeat exactly, but something in the neighborhood of it. The resignation of a man who has run the numbers and found them wanting. "Gretch will be done with this valley in 2 years, he said, "when the railroad comes. It'll all be his anyway." "Not hers," I said, "not while she's on it." He looked toward the house. The window was dark. Nora was in there, I knew, awake, and with the rifle I'd put beside her bed. She had more sense than to show herself in a lit window. "What's she to you?" Vance said. It was an honest question, the kind that surprises you by being honest. I thought about it for a moment. "I don't know yet," I said, "but whatever she is, she's worth standing in this doorway for." Vance looked at me for another moment. Then he turned and walked back to his horse and picked up the reins and led the animal out through the gate and mounted and rode south. I stood in the barn doorway until I couldn't hear him any more. Then I stood there a while longer, because the night was very still, and the valley was very quiet, and I wanted to be sure. When I finally went inside the barn, Nora was in the doorway. She had the rifle. She was watching me. "He's gone," I said. "I heard," she said. We stood there for a moment in the way that people stand when something significant has just passed, and neither of them is sure what comes next. "What's she to you?" Nora said. She had heard that too. "I meant what I said," I told her. "I don't know yet." She looked at me for a long time. She had the particular quality of stillness that I'd been noticing since the first day, the quality of a person who doesn't rush past things. "That's an honest answer," she said. "I try." She went back inside. I went back to the barn. And neither of us said anything more that night, which somehow felt like the right conclusion. The weeks that followed were something I hadn't had in 3 years. They were ordinary, in the way that days can be ordinary when there is no threat in them, or when the threat has receded far enough to let you breathe. We did the work of the ranch. We brought the cattle up to better pasture, and their condition improved. I repaired the barn roof properly and rechinked 2 sections of the adobe wall where the cold got in. Nora taught me things about running cattle in high desert country that I hadn't known from my years on flatter ground, and I taught her things about reading country and reading men that she absorbed with the quiet efficiency she brought to everything. We ate together most evenings. We talked about the ranch, about the valley, about things that had nothing to do with either. I told her more about Harlow County than I'd told anyone in pieces over several evenings, and she listened the way a person listens when they are genuinely interested rather than waiting for their turn to speak. "You think it was your fault," she said one evening, "about the man who died in the jail cell." "I don't know," I said. "That's what I can't resolve. If I knew it was my fault, I could do something with that. If I knew it wasn't, I could let it go. It's the not knowing." "Some things don't resolve," she said. "Garrett died, and I still don't know if there was something I should have seen, something I should have done differently in those last days. I'll never know. At some point you just have to keep going." "How do you do that?" "You find something worth keeping going for," she said, simply, without drama. And then she looked at me in that particular way she had, and we both left that alone for the time being. The 5 heads sold well, better than Nora had expected. The 3 weeks of better pasture and quieter days had put weight back on them, and she got a good price at the Pelford stock auction. I drove them in with her and stood at the gate of the auction pen and watched her do business, and she was competent and clear-eyed and didn't take a cent less than the cattle were worth. She paid the note payment at Paulsom's bank on the way out of town, and Paulsom looked at her over the counter and said, "6 months more, Mrs. Fenn." "5," she said. "I intend to pay double next month." He smiled at that. We rode back to the valley in the evening, the horses easy, the day cooling off around us. The mesa was turning red in the sunset light, and the dry creek bed that ran along the east edge of the ranch caught the color and held it for a moment. "You could stay," Nora said. I didn't say anything right away, because when something you've been quietly hoping for is said out loud, there's a moment where you have to let it be real before you respond to it. "The place needs another set of hands," she said. "I'm not going to pretend that's not true. But that's not the only reason I'm saying it." "I know," I said. "I'm not asking you to decide anything today." "I know that too." We rode in silence for a while. The ranch came into view, the adobe house with its wood frame addition, the barn with its newly patched roof, the corrals in good repair, the cattle grazing in the evening light on pasture that was green and calm. Garrett Fenn had built this place and died before it was finished, and Nora had held it for 18 months by herself against everything the territory and Reuel Gretsch had sent against her, and she had not broken and she had not yielded, and the place was still here. It was a good place. It had been built by someone who knew what he wanted and went and got it. I had spent 3 years with no clear sense of what I wanted, or whether wanting was something I was still allowed to do. Looking at that ranch in the evening light, I thought maybe it was. "I'll stay," I said. Nora nodded once. She didn't say anything, but something shifted in her face, not relief, exactly. More like a door opening that had been closed for a long time. "You'll need to fix the gate hinge," she said. "It's been dragging since March." "I'll do it tomorrow," I said. "And the tack room wants reorganizing." "I'll get to it." "And Nora, I said. She stopped. I'll get to all of it, I said. She looked at me, and this time what crossed her face was the full version of the thing I had glimpsed in pieces over the past weeks, the warmth underneath the iron, the part of her that hadn't gone away even after 18 months of loss and threat and loneliness. We rode through the gate. The note cleared 5 months later. Paulson sent a letter out by Ryder, and Nora read it at the kitchen table and set it down and sat with her hands flat on the table for a moment. I was across the room, and I watched her and didn't say anything. Then she picked it up again and walked to the window and held it in the light from outside. Clear, she said. Yes, I said. Garrett's land, she said. Ours now. It was the first time she'd said ours in that way, not the ranch's, not mine, but ours, and she said it quietly and without fanfare, the way a woman says a thing she has been turning over for a while and has finally decided is true. I stood up and crossed the room and stood beside her at the window, and we looked out at the valley together, the corrals, the cattle fat on good grass, the fence posts standing clean and white in the morning light where I'd set new ones in the fall. The dry creek bed caught the sun and ran with it the way it ran with color at dusk. The mesa above us was huge and still. I want to put in a proper water line from the uphill spring, I said, before summer. The gravity feed is unreliable in a dry year. I want to add 6 more head in the spring, she said, maybe 8. We can do 8. And the wood frame addition needs proper flooring. The plank boards are warping. I've been thinking about that, I said, if we. She took my hand. It was that simple. She just reached over and took my hand the way a person does when they are done with the long conversation that surrounds a thing and are ready to simply be at the thing itself. I held on. The valley was quiet in the way valleys are when nothing is threatening them, in the way this valley had earned the right to be quiet after everything it had been through. The cattle moved slow and easy in the pasture. The wind off the mesa came down steady and clean. Garrett Finn had known what he wanted and gone and got it. I had spent a long time not knowing, and then I had come over a mesa rim on a limping horse and ridden down into a dry creek valley, and somewhere between the burned fence posts and the 5 cattle in better pasture, and a woman who asked plain questions and waited for plain answers, I had found out. Some men figure out what they're standing for when there's nothing left to stand for. I was lucky. I figured it out in time. I didn't let go of her hand.